Let's take some action. Hello there, everyone. My name is Teresa McCloy, and you're listening to the Real Life Process podcast, episode number 180. I'm excited to be back this week on the podcast, and I invite you to listen in as we share stories, tips, practical action steps that can lead you from living your life from rest, not rush, and really doing what matters. That is actually the title of a new book that we have coming out this fall, and we are super excited to be walking through over these few episodes the content of that new book. So we've been doing this for 3 or 4 weeks now, just going through the content that's in the book, which is actually the components of the real life process. And we'll share this signature content with you to help you thrive in your life and in your work. The content is actually a framework that helps you develop a unique modern day rule of life through self-discovery, 90-day projects, time management, and spiritual practices, adding in both our work and our walk together. So we discover how to craft a life that's truly extraordinary. And we're excited to dive in more on this podcast episode about taking some action. So whether you're listening to grow your life or to grow yourself, to grow your business, we're just glad you're listening and becoming a part of the Real Life Process community. And if you have found us actually on the podcast app, on your favorite podcast app, we also want you to know that we record live now, also on video on YouTube. Well, I guess it's actually not live, but we're recording on YouTube, so you can also watch as well as listen to the podcast. So we are excited to be using that tool as well. So if you like to see some slides, if you like to see some things, you can head on over to the YouTube channel as well at the Real Life Process and find us there in video format. So today we're going to dive in on what we call the second component of the process. Up to now, we have covered walking through the pre-work that might go into working with the components of the real life process. We've talked about those signature tools of that pre-work, and we've also talked about starting to create this document in component number 1, real life being, and we call that document the real life view. So you can go back to a couple of previous episodes, dive in, listen to the podcast, and walk through it step by step so you'll know the components of the real life process and what is it all about? What exactly are we doing as we create this modern day rule of life? So let me just review the components and then we'll dive into actually today's component is component number 2, real life action. So we have 4 components in the process: real life being, real life action, real life time, and real life living. And each of those are about coming together to create what we call a modern day rule of life. With real life being, we're defining how you want to be, the internal piece of self. In real life action, we're starting to take those things that you said that mattered and put them into actionable steps. We're going to talk about that on today's episode. Next week, we'll be diving into how do I live this out in my everyday, ordinary life through my calendar and how I manage time. And then on the very 4th component, we'll talk about real life living. How do I sustain this process? And that's probably one of the questions that I get asked the most by listeners and by my private clients. And even as we teach and train our facilitators that use this process in the work that they do as coaches and consultants, spiritual directors, entrepreneurs, people that have learned this process and decided they want to have the components to use in the work that they do, they ask that question too. How do I sustain it? So we'll make sure we cover that in some of the upcoming episodes. Once we've created it, how do I keep it going in sustainability? But for today, we're actually going to talk about real life action. So let's talk about the tools that we have. The tools that we have that we've walked through a couple of episodes back are actually doing our needs and values. What does that look like? Maybe working with some type of personality tool. We love the tool of the Enneagram, so that is the one that we use. And we have some free resources that you can actually download from both of those two episodes, the free needs and values intro assessment and a typing guide for the Enneagram personality profile, showing you how to work with that tool through the Harmony model of the Enneagram. And then we've talked about mind mapping and how we love that tool as well. We've started to create all of that and put it together on a document. And as we said in last week's episode, you can either do this in a Google Drive or you can actually download the real life view document that we use so that you can capture all of this information, all of these things that you're discovering about yourself in one place. And last week, we really looked at this real life view document and focused on what we call the areas of focus. What are the 5 to 7 things that are the big rocks that really matter in your life? Whether that be spiritual or emotional or with your family and your friends or around your business. What are the rocks that matter to you? What are the things that you say, these are the things that belong in my life when I think about discerning what matters to me as I check in spiritually with myself, as I check in emotionally, as I check in physically. These are the things that I've discerned that matter to me and how I want to live my everyday ordinary life. And when we get those things in place, then we can start to take action. We also talked about, once I know that something matters to me, that it's a big rock, it's an area I want to focus in, then we talked about writing an I am statement. So you may want to go back and listen to last week's episode about how do we write an I am statement. A statement around each of these areas that says, in the next 12 to 18 months, here's how I want that area of my life to look like. That's super important because as we look at taking action on something, we have to know what we're running towards. What is the goal out there that we want to achieve? What do we want this part of my life or this part of your life to look like? So what we're going to do today as we look at component number 2 and making this action a plan around it, let's go back and look at a couple of I am statements. Now, before we do this, I want you to get back in your visual a little bit, the triangles that we've talked about. We've talked about that upside down triangle where work is really defining us. It's flowing into our life and we really don't know ourselves well. Or living into the triangle that is wide at the base, that self-knowing, that first component of who am I being, that flows up into our life and becomes helping us, it helps us live into the work that we're doing. Now, that's where real life action sits. It sits in the middle of the triangle. It's going to help us move forward. And once we get this action defined, we're going to add it into our real life view document, that 2-page document that we've been creating. Remember, we don't want it to be more than 2 pages. We want it to be something that we can look at and we can refer back to very, very quickly. And so you might want to download in the show notes a copy of the real life view document. Just go to the show notes for the podcast and you can download a template that will help you out. And you can see that on that second page of that document, we have what we call the projects. And we have a place for you to put in 3 or 4 projects if you would like to. And we're going to talk about why we want to limit it to only 3 or 4 things. But you can list those projects there and you can list the action steps. And you can get that in the show notes for this week's episode, or you can just write it out on a piece of paper. But we're really starting to live into making this part of your real life. What am I going to do? Now that I know who I want to be, what am I going to do? So what is the actionable steps that we're going to take right here? Well, I often hear clients say they're overwhelmed. Usually the reason they feel overwhelmed is they feel that they should be able to do it all at the same time. And I write about this in the book that we have coming out this fall. A better idea for this is to think about living in harmony. To know that when we focus on 2 or 3 areas of our life over the next 90 days, this is the best way to not feel overwhelmed. Work smarter, not harder, as they say. Forward energy creates momentum. So, for example, if I have 5 or 6 areas in my life and I begin to feel that I need to be doing something in every one, I need to be spending time with my family, my extended family. I need to be spending regular time with my spouse. I need to be spending time with my children. I need to be working on my business and in my business. I need to be growing spiritually. Do you hear how even as I say all those I need tos, you can feel the angst come up inside of you? What if we were to take some time to just sit and look at the areas of focus we've chosen and discern in a very spiritual way, God, what is it you have for me in the next 2 to 3 months? What are the most important things that I can be focusing on? Is it my spiritual life? Is it my financial, getting my financial things in order? Is it a relationship with a child or a parent or a spouse or friendships? What is the area that you and I together, God, have discerned that I want to move forward with? We call that deciding what area it is so that I can create a project that will help me move forward. Just on those things, I'm going to set everything else aside, trust that God has those things so that I can live in harmony. Because remember, your everyday life is still going on. We're just going to give some focused attention to these certain areas, and we're going to do it for a very short amount of time, just the next month or 2. Everything else is going to come back up for us in a couple of months, and we're going to look again, and we're going to say, now what? Now what's the area? I've written an I am statement around each area, but what is the one that you're calling me to focus on and give attention to right now? So let me show you how this comes together. Let me walk through this process with you of how we decide what those projects are. First thing is which area, right? Let's make that decision. Which area? Let me give you an example of this. Here's a couple of I am statements. The first one I want to give you an example on is someone that wrote an I am statement that said this around their health and well-being area of focus. I am prioritizing my health and I'm exercising 4 to 5 days a week. And after discerning, they felt like this is the one that I need to focus on in the next month or 2. So what I suggest that you do once you know that that is the one, then let's use our mind map and put that in the center of the circle. Remember, the mind map, we're just drawing a circle on a napkin, a piece of paper, a whiteboard, and we're going to put that in the center, that I am focusing on my health, exercising 4 to 5 days a week. So this might be called your self-care and soul care. This might be called your health and wellness area of focus, whatever you have named it in your real life. Put that in the center. And then as you think about growing in the next 90 days in this area, stretching yourself around exercising 4 to 5 days a week, what might come up? And here are the simple things that might come up if we were to brainstorm around that. Well, first of all, I need to decide how I'm going to exercise. What am I going to do? Do I want to walk? Do I want to run? Do I want to go to the gym? Do I want to work out at home? How do I want to do it? So we might write that in one of the circles. How am I doing it? And write down all the different ways. We might need to decide setting aside the time to do it. Do I need to talk to someone else or have a conversation about having the time to do it? So do I need to talk to a spouse and decide, hey, I'd like to work out on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. So I need to have a conversation. So write that in a circle. Maybe you need to buy clothes to work out in. Maybe you need to buy some equipment. Maybe you need to research whether you want to go to the gym. What is this going to cost you? How much investment, or can you do it for free? So you can see how each of those things go into one of these bubbles. So we just brain dump out all the things. And then as we look at those, we decide what are the actionable steps that I need to take and which one will come first. We call these the action steps. And as we're looking at this, sometimes we will just learn that even something we wrote in a little circle around the mind map really has several steps to it, several actionable steps. So maybe all you want to do in the next 90 days towards this big area of focus, towards this I am statement, is researching the different ways that you could exercise and trying some of them out. So maybe that is your action steps. I'm going to walk for a week or two. I'm going to run for a week or two. I'm going to work at home. Action step number 4 is I'm going to check out some online videos. You see what I'm getting at is maybe it's not about getting all the things done that you've mind mapped around, but it's choosing one thing in the next 90 days and making momentum and forward progress around that one thing. And then you get to decide 2 or 3 months from now in the next 90 days, do I want to stay with this area of focus and keep developing it out and keep getting to the next level and deciding, yes, this is what I'm going to do, because my ultimate goal is that I am taking care of myself, prioritizing myself, and exercising with my health 4 to 5 days a week. But I get there in small incremental steps along the way. Baby steps sometimes, but I'm making forward motion. And I mind mapped it out and decided what my action steps were around this project. Now that's really important that we clarify. In real life process language, we call them action steps. Those are different than my to-do lists, because as you'll see in the next component, we set aside some time to work on this particular project. And when we do, we go down through the action steps and just do the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. So let me give you another example. As you listen in, let me read this I am statement. I regularly journal, walk, and engage in meaningful conversation with my closest friends. This is energizing and grounding for me. So this area of focus was about long-term friendships. And this person wrote down that I regularly journal, walk, and engage in meaningful conversations with my closest friends. This is energizing and grounding for me. So do you hear those things? I journal, I walk, and I engage in meaningful conversations. So as this person might mind map around this particular area of focus, they might talk about, how do I want to journal? How often do I want to journal? How many friends would I like to be in meaningful conversations with? Where would I want to walk? What does engaging mean? Is that a phone call? Is that a Zoom call? So as you brainstorm all these things, then you might put in some actionable steps around a small project, like all I'm going to do in the next 90 days is regularly journal. So action step number 1 might be go buy a journal. Action step number 2 might be decide when I'm going to journal. What part of the day feels good for me to set aside time to journal? Action step number 3 might be deciding, do I want a framework to journal? Do I want to do it digital or do I want to do it handwritten? You can see all the different ways just by taking the journaling piece and moving forward with it. Or maybe it would be around deciding what friends. That might be another project that this person might do around this area of focus. But the whole idea is to mind map them out, get a brain dump on paper, and then get 7 to 10 actionable steps down that you want to take around this project, around this area of focus in your life. So here's some action steps that you might take from this. Decide the 1 to 2 projects from your areas of focus that you want to focus on. Now, I really want to encourage you not to choose more than a couple this first 90 days. Just choose a couple and write out some action steps. You will be surprised. It won't look like or feel like really that's all I'm doing. But remember, everyday life is going on as well. You're still showing up for work. You're still serving in different places. You're still attentive to your family and your friends. You're just doing small incremental steps with these projects to move forward and grow in these areas of your life. So I want to share with you a little bit of a story as we wrap up on the podcast today. One of our facilitators, Mark Ross, has this in the book that we have coming out this fall. And he's talking about the projects and working through the component number 2 of real life action. He says, it gives me permission to let go of some areas of my life and just focus on 2 or 3 things that are really important to me. It's really a holistic approach, both life and work, that he appreciates. By approaching both his personal and professional life this way, it helped him find time to care for parents, which he fondly came to call the Parent Project. He had aging parents that he was moving out of homes and moving into homes and moving into extended living. And even during this time, he lost one of their parents. And identifying it this way helped me look at it objectively, is what he says. Along with the work that he wanted to do, he was able to find time to do both by having a process to work through. So taking something as meaningful as a transition for his parents, saying, this is a project that I'm working on, and every 90 days, I have some new things that I'm putting in here. It was an ongoing area of focus for him. Didn't mean that he didn't care about his work, and he had a project around his work, but he also had a project in his life. Both belong. So I encourage you, even as you look at your areas of focus and you say, what are the small incremental steps that would help me move forward in this area? Not all of it, but just some small things that I could do in the next 90 days or so. Write those down, put them into actionable steps. So you think through those small things, those 7 to 10 things. And one might be in an area of work for you, and one might be in just something very personal, like a parent project, or something to do with a child, or something to do with spiritual growth, or self-development, or healthcare. There's so many areas that we want to focus on in our life. I just encourage you to take those small, meaningful steps. Thank you for listening to this component number 2, real life action, on this episode of the podcast. Remember that you can connect with us in so many ways. If you want to grow the impact that you're having, maybe you even want to increase your income by looking at what it would be like to facilitate this work for others. Either way, check us out over at thereallifeprocess.com. You can also join us on Facebook at the Real Life Process community. It's absolutely free. It is a private group, but you can visit us there in the Facebook group as well. We just love to connect with you. You can find more about coaching there. You can find out more about our community there. And you can also download some of our free resources right there on the webpage. So thereallifeprocess.com, we spell real life with 1 L, and we would love to have you come and join us and check us out. With the book coming out through early summer, we'll have the ebook, and then this fall we'll have the book in print. You definitely want to subscribe to our email as well, and you can do that by downloading any of our free content there on the website, or just let me know that you would like to be on our email list so you're the first to know when our resources come out. Remember that the whole reason that we do this work, the whole reason that we walk through this process and become so purposeful and so meaningful around the content of creating a modern day rule of life, what really matters to you, is so that we can have extraordinary days and each moment matters. So remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. And we'll be back next week with more from the Real Life Process podcast.